All right. Now we'll have an update on our penny sales tax projects from Mr. Volbrecht.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Just let me get my slides up here real quick. Okay, so the sales tax program has been in effect since 2017. I'm going to give you a summary of the funding and how much we've spent and what's left, and then I can get further into the details of the projects that we've used the money for and what we have currently planned. The sales tax program, originally we planned it out where we're going to do it all in about 5 years. It's a 10-year program. We have to spend all the money, $60 million by 2027, and so the schedule sometimes is kind of fluid because we've been moving things out as our resources dictate what we can do at the current moment, but we have accomplished quite a bit, as you'll see. So, basically, the $60 million, it's a $60 million or 10 years, whichever comes first. We've currently collected about $31.3 million through the first quarter of this year. And there's a sales tax oversight committee that meets every quarter, and we go through all the details and updates of what's been going on. They ask questions, and basically, so that we have somebody looking over our shoulder to make sure that what we're doing with the money is being fiscally prudent, and with the intention that was derived when it was put together. We currently are getting a new member of the sales tax oversight committee. And so our next meeting, we haven't actually scheduled yet, but we were going to have one in March that we did not. So I would anticipate in the next month or so, we're going to have another sales tax oversight committee meeting. So it consists of 14 specific major projects, and some of those might be broken down into smaller projects because there's quite a bit of money that was just not entirely defined. One of those, the first one is the Greenway and Multipurpose Pass project. That has an allocation of $2.54 million. We've expended $666,000 so far, and we have a remaining allocation of $1.873, of which we've committed that $1.873 to specific projects that we intend to use that money for, and I'll get into the details of those later. The citywide roadway improvements, that's the largest fund of the sales tax program. That was allotted $12.3 million, of which we've expended about $3.92, and we have other allocations of committed to various projects of $3.536 million, with a remaining allocation of $4.8, of which $418,000 of that we are allocating to other commitments since March of this year. So there's about $4.4 million of non-defined committed or non-committed money remaining in the original 12.3. And the makeup of the the $418,000, again, there's a number of projects that we use this for. Northmore Elementary, which is improvements down near the Northmore Elementary School, with about $120,000, which we're using for design. We'll eventually have to put some money in for doing the construction work. We're also doing school zone upgrades, which is phase 4, which is there's about 7 schools involved in that. We have a program where we're mandated by the state to upgrade all of the school zone safety facilities for the school zone, like flashing beacons, signage, striping, crosswalks, and things like that. And so we have used some of the citywide roadway improvements for school zone upgrades. We also did some work on Elizabeth Drive, where we have another $8,300 that we need to put in to final out that job, and then some money that we put in for Gregory Road at US 1, another $2,600. Some of the money for these projects was in that original $3.9 million that I mentioned that we spent already. And then the North Shore neighborhood, we have another $193,000 that we're putting into that project to take care of a lot of the additional changes and things like that we did on that. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So the other projects are the Broadway Avenue improvements. That has an allocation of $5.461 million. We've expended about $150,000 on that, and that's mostly been done in study and planning. We have a remaining allocation of $5.3 million. And El Monte Park neighborhood, that has an allocation of 1.77, of which we've spent about $98,000 so far, with a remaining 1.671. And then Flamingo Park neighborhood is another neighborhood project, $3 million roughly. We spent about $86,000. We've been doing this design work somewhat in-house. We have a remaining allocation about $2.97 million to spend on that neighborhood. Parker Avenue improvements, which is down the south end of Parker, from Summit to Forest Hill. We have $6 million allotted towards that. We've spent about $203. So we still have $5.8 million. We also have some supplemental grant money from FDOT on this, which makes it about $8 million for the whole project. South Dixie improvements, that was allotted $3,050,000. We spent $73,000 in doing some study and planning on that. We have a $2.9 million remaining allocation on that. And that project currently is kind of like in limbo. I'll get into that a little bit later in the details. Coleman Park Community Center, we had $3.55 million allotted of that. We've spent $138,000. This is through March of this year. The remaining allocation at $3.411, we've already allocated that towards the design build contract to build that community center, and that is still in the design phase. Then we have the Gaines Park Community Center. That had $4.97 million allotted out of the sales tax program, of which we spent $264,000, mostly for doing the concept designs, remaining of $4.7 million, and then there's another $3 million towards that project in the Parks Bond program. Pleasant City Community Center, that was a $1.4 million allocation, of which we spent $189,000 through March. The other $1.23 million has also been committed and pretty much has been spent by now because we're almost completed with the renovations of Pleasant City Community Center. I expect that project will wrap up probably in another month or two. And then the Fire Police Training Facility, that had $7.1 million allocated. We've spent about $433,000, and a lot of that had to do with preparing the site where we currently have the temporary fire station 9. We also provided new water and utility services in conjunction with the county that was doing some improvements on Roebuck Road. So we've got the water main extended down so that we can provide water service to the future training facility, which is out by the ECR. And we still have about $6.7 million left in that allocation to eventually work on the training facility itself. Howard Park Community Center, another $4.97 million. We spent $60,000 roughly in doing concept designs. It's currently in a design competition with two firms who are putting together new concept designs that will be they're going to turn those in like next week, and then they'll be setting up community meetings to go through those and eventually select one of the concept designs and go forward with that firm that had the one that was the winner. And this last slide, I know it's kind of small, but basically it's kind of like a cash flow diagram. You can see that the salmon colored line as of March of 2021, this shows what we're, based on the cash flow that we've assigned to our schedule. You can see that in 2021 we expect to have allocated or utilized $19.1 million of the money that we've collected so far. And then the lines down below, the actual revenue, you can show, it shows that we've collected the $31.3 million. And we anticipated it on a 10-year thing, which was basically $6 million a year. And we have collected more than that each year. The 2.227 number is what we had collected so far for 2021 through March. So,
Do we have a dip because of COVID in 2020 below our projections?
not necessarily. Other than just the normal slowdown of certain things, but we've actually been doing a lot of roadway work this past year in 2020 with sales tax money. So
No, in terms of actual revenues.
Yes, we did have a slowdown in revenues last year from what was previously done.
How far below the 6 million?
It was about $4.5 million.
Okay, but we expect that will rebound.
Yes. And we, over the 10-year period, and I think the projections for this year are up again too, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to some other slides
Commissioner
now.
Lambert has a question.
Okay.
Mr. Volbrecht, I think you may have skipped a slide. I don't know if you did it intentionally. The slide right before this one, did we see that one?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
My apologies.
Good
Yes,
eyes.
Palmetto Park improvements, that was a $444,000 project. We spent 45, and then the remaining 399. Most of that is also very close to being spent as well. And then the citywide lighting improvements, there was $2.54 million that was allotted towards that. And then we've spent $361,000 of that through March, and we have another $2.1 million to spend on lighting in the city. Let me go to the, this was that same graph that I showed you previously.
You'll make this PowerPoint available to the commissioners?
I will.
Thank you.
And this is basically what we go over with the sales tax committee when we meet with them. And then we have a specific schedule for all of the projects, and so we go through and we've forecasted when we're going to do the projects. The ones that are in green are the ones that are done. And then, like for instance, on the Greenway path, we've allotted $597,000 towards the Clear Lake Trail project, of which $287,000 is toward the design and another $310,000 towards that construction cost. I could go through these, but I don't know if you want to get into that level of detail. And basically, it lays out all of the projects. This shows the $4.8 million unallocated money from the citywide roadway improvements, the Broadway project, and it just gives basically all the details for the money that's going to be spent on those, or that's allocated for them, and how we plan on utilizing that. And I will share this with you electronically, unless you want me to go through anything specifically. I'd be glad to.
Commissioner Fox. I don't know if your mic is on.
I think it was maybe 2 slides before this, there was, in the roadway projects, I noticed that there is, Roosevelt Estates is listed there as completed. So I was just curious, I mean, in some of the 4.4 million, I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, but how do we determine with the 4.4 million that's not committed, how do we determine what that can be spent on?
Well, we did actually do 2 phases of Roosevelt Estates, and we spent I don't know, several $100,000 so far on repaving parts of Roosevelt Estates. We have a current project that we're have a grant for on 7th Street. We have $572,000 allotted to cover our match for that grant out of the sales tax. And then there's another about $1.8 million of estimated paving work to do in that northeast section of Roosevelt Estates, which is, we're currently going to get ready to start our community engagement on that project with the community, with the assistance of JSA. And we hope to be able to, come to terms with that neighborhood and start working out there, in the next few months. And so this reflects the projects that we did previously from last year.
Mayor, if I could kind of clarify a little bit. So, Commissioner, to answer your question on the use of the funds, and that's an important question, and we just actually did a request for legal services to give us an opinion on unallocated funding or allocated funding to shift it to other priority projects. That can be done with the city commission approval. So the staff can come back to city commission with new projects or increased funding for other projects to be able to then reallocate either unallocated funding or even allocated funding that's in an existing project, move it to another one. So that can be done without having to go out to a referendum, even though these projects were listed, I believe, in the referendum that was approved by voters. You don't have to go back out to a voter referendum. And as an example, Kevin mentioned some issues with South Dixie Highway project. There's over $4 million allocated to that project. Because of the amount of community input that we got and that FDOT got, they really didn't want lane elimination in that area. You know, that funding is sitting there, and if it is the will of this body to move that funding into another project, we can look at doing so. So those are the discussions that we really need to have. Fire police training, you know, that's a project that I think could be expanded potentially to include, for example, we have a warehouse out in the warehouse district. We have our warehouse there, the city warehouse, and some other facilities that could also potentially go out west, and that would free up space in that area for potentially private development that we can then get revenues from as well. So there's things that we need to go over and consider about how to utilize this funding going forward.
All right, we'll have those discussions and come back with some more fine-tuned recommendations. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Volbrecht. So a couple questions here. So today's presentation is primarily on the financials and where we are, because I hear then, I had that same question that Commissioner Fox had. You mentioned 4.8 million unallocated under roadway improvements, and I clearly have some ideas on what that could be used for, but certainly understand that when this referendum passed, it was my understanding that there was a list of projects, we couldn't deviate from those. So today, we're not talking about that, but that is slated for another time. Is that correct?
Well, I can certainly go through those details if you'd like. I wanted to go through the financials of them. Of the $4.8 million, you know, we have revenues that we utilize for roadway improvements. We have the gas tax and we have the sales tax, essentially. In the current priority paving list for next year, there's about $4.7 million of paving costs that are priorities based on PCIs or other synergies, such as Roosevelt Estates, for instance. So somehow between the sales tax money and the gas tax revenues, we're going to try to fund those projects appropriately. So even though it says there's $4.8 million, it isn't just like sitting there waiting to be used. There's a number of priorities that come up on a regular basis that we utilize this money for appropriately. And, you know, I could share that information with you as well if you wanted to see that.
But the focus of this presentation is only on the progress of the penny sales tax projects. Yeah. All right, if you want to do a separate presentation at some point on road paving, priorities, and sources of funds, we could do that. But I don't want to convolute that discussion into this discussion. So let's focus on where we are with the status of the penny sales projects. And a question I have is, I thought at one point we were going to have a dashboard or something where the public could access this information, maybe not to this degree of detail, but kind of a 10,000-foot level as to where a particular project was. Is that happening?
Actually, that's included in our CIP website. We have that information on there now.
All right. Can we get word to the public that if they are interested, you know, this is something that we went to the people for. So they should be able to monitor the city's progress without a lot of effort. So if there's some way of getting the information to the public that if you want information on the status of penny sales projects, this is where you go, or something, so that we're being transparent as how we're using these monies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor, we'll work with the communications department and get something out. And I think our parks bond is a good example that we maybe can replicate some of what we're doing with our parks bond, which is very transparent and easy to get to. So,
well, let me just give you a quick summary of the various 14 projects, okay? Maybe that will be helpful. So on the Greenway multipurpose paths projects, again, we've utilized some of the money. We built some trails in the parks. We have the money set aside for Clear Lake Trail to help with our match for the grant. The other money was, we had about $1.5 million that was allotted towards the Flagler Trail project. Now that project's basically being redefined, and so that money will probably need to get reallocated to something else. We do have other trails and multi-use paths that we anticipate to do. We have some money to spend on 26th Street. We may do something related to a Flagler Trail, but right now we're going to, it's just been allocated towards that until we fully redefine what we're going to do. We're planning on just doing a paving project on Flagler to include bicycle lanes, and I may or may not be able to utilize some of this money for that, but hopefully we will be able to. And that's where the Greenway multi-use path money is currently being planned, how that's currently being planned to be used. On the citywide roadway improvements, I basically kind of elaborated on what we're doing with that, so I'm not going to reiterate that. On Broadway, the money that's allocated towards that, we're currently working with FDOT. We were going to do a lane repurposing project there similar to South Dixie. They have told us that they do not want us to do it that way, and we have come up with some alternatives that we think will work and we'll be able to keep that project going. We've been in a lot of discussions with the technical traffic staff from FDOT, as well as working with RISE to come up with some ideas on how we can incorporate the safety improvements with a complete streets aspects to it, and we are very actively involved with them together to try to salvage this project and make it be something that is going to be worth doing, because there's about $8 million of grant money associated with it on top of the $6 million that we have allocated in the sales tax. And so we're very, very diligently working on trying to come up with something on this Broadway job that's going to be a viable alternative that would be acceptable to all parties who are involved in that, the city as well as FDOT and the community. And so we're working again, like I said, with Craig Glover. We're going to start doing focus.
Kevin.
Okay, so
Come back with specific plans. Don't talk about
Okay.
what we may be doing, what we might be doing. It's a much more productive conversation if you come to this body with specific plans as to what you're going to do. We don't need to see how the sausage is made. Give us an idea of what the plans are, not who you're talking to, what we might do. It's too wishy-washy. I need specifics. We need specifics, okay?
Okay, as a matter of fact, there's another workshop coming up where there's going to be Broadway is going to be one of the topics, so I'll get into that there. And again, Flamingo Park, we've been working with that community directly to determine what we're going to be doing. And, I don't really need to go through all these details.
No,
if you
just
want me to.
penny sales tax projects update, okay? What have we spent to date? What is left to spend? What's the plan to spend it? All right? What is the timeline for getting it done? That's another thing I don't see here. I know it's on your, what's that fancy name for this chart? What's it?
Gantt. It's a Gantt chart. Gantt chart.
Yeah, my wife does that stuff. Gantt chart. Okay, I know it's fancy. I never can read them. But anyway, in a simple PowerPoint presentation, so that people like me who are kind of slow can see specifically our progress to date, our plans for going forward, specific plans for going forward, okay? So maybe at some other time, we could redo this and get it a little bit more fine-tuned.
Okay, I apologize.
No need to apologize. It's, just let's get it done. Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. And if I may, Mayor, I apologize. I should have probably done this from the beginning. It was at my request that this item was put on the agenda. And I did so because there were some questions from the public, especially confusion as the Parks Bond came in as to why projects were not in the Parks Bond. And I think my intention was to give the broader view to the public to say that there are various allocations of money, and they're used in various ways, and staff is very creative about looking to see where we can fund different aspects of projects. And I think the distinct difference was in the Parks Bond, we're given the allocation of money on the upfront to spend, whereas the penny sales tax is accumulated over time. The tax has to be collected. You heard Mr. Volbrecht say we've collected about 50% because we're about 5 years into this. So there's a difference in the funding mechanism, which I thought was important to point out, as well as that this is just a portion of the budget. Gaines Park is a perfect example of that, where I had residents questioning why Gaines Park got a smaller allocation than, say, Curry Park or Howard Park. And the important thing was to look at where all these allocations were coming from. I guess if it would be okay, Mayor, the main question that I wanted to address here was the prioritization of projects and the timing, and how do we make sure that there are some very major projects that are important to a lot of our districts here. And we kind of hear it as a first come, first serve. So I just want to make sure that we have some of these major projects that don't get to the end of the line and lack funding. So I think that was the major thing that I wanted to look at to say, what's our progress marker? How are we marking that progress? And how do we ensure that when we get to the end of 10 years, what we have left unfunded has some sort of plan going
Are
forward?
there
So that
specific
was my intent.
projects that you have in mind?
Not specific projects necessarily, Mayor, and so that may be addressed at another time. But I think what I was looking at was more of a theory of where we're funding, what we've funded so far, and if we see in the future any major shortfalls, which it sounds like we're still at a place in this process, being 50% through, that we don't see a lot of funding shortfalls. You addressed COVID and COVID's effect on this, but that may vary in the next few years as far as spending being higher or lower. So my intention was to take a look at this, see if we saw any major shortfalls. We have Pleasant City Community Center, Coleman Park Community Center, Gaines Park Community Center, a lot of really big community centers, and being very North End centric, I know all the North End projects on here, but again, lots of projects throughout the city, fire training facility, et cetera. These are the big allocations that I wanted to look and see, are we looking at shortfalls there, and do we need to be looking at our budgeting going forward to say, are there other funding sources we need to be looking at because there's going to be a major shortfall in X project?
Well, I don't anticipate that there's going to be a shortfall. We're going to collect the $60 million, and we'll probably collect it before the 10 years are up. The way this is currently scheduled out, this last column here is 2024, okay? So up through 2021, this is 17, 18, 19, 20. So in 2021, we plan on spending about $11.5 million to reach the essentially $60 million of allocation and expenditures sometime by the end of 2024. That's where we're currently planned to go forward with. Now, there may be some fluctuations in that some of these projects may push out a little bit, but as far as the money that's allocated from the sales tax proceeds, most of it is specifically defined in what it's going to be used in the community centers, the neighborhoods. The only ones that are somewhat flexible is the citywide roadway improvements and the lighting improvements and the Greenway multi-use path projects. And so we've tried to lay this out as methodically and as strategically as we can. There is some room for some adjustments to that, particularly since the South Dixie project is likely not going to go forward. And that money could possibly be allocated to something else. But for the most part, everything else that's laid out in here is probably going to stay just like it is.
And so let me ask the question in this way. We're 50% through this process. We're through the planning phase of a lot of our major projects. So do we see any budgetary shortfalls? We planned on spending, $5 million on Coleman Park Community Center. We're seeing it come in at $7 million, so $2 million has to come from a project somewhere else. Have we identified any of those projects that we need to look at alternative sources of funding for?
Not at this point. Obviously with Gaines Park, when we put together the concept plan on that based on what the community wanted, we realized that the $4.9 million is not going to be sufficient for that, and that's where the $3 million from the Parks bond came in. On Howard Park, Pleasant City, we got that taken care of within the budgets that we had. And for Howard Park, and Coleman Park is still within the budget that we had for that. Howard Park, we anticipate that we're going to be able to do that for the funding we have. The current market is very volatile at the moment, but hopefully by the time that goes out to bid, things will have settled down and we'll get a decent price for that, and we'll be able to still do that within the budget. But that's still yet to be determined. But for the most part, I would say that the projects that we are allocating and identifying for the sales tax program are going to be done within the budgets that we have allocated from the sales tax proceeds.
Just one final question, Mayor, if I
Yes.
may. And Armando, this may be a question for you, as it's more financial, or it may require follow-up from Mr. Parks. As we're collecting this, you can see that we have a lot of pending projects that we haven't actually expended a lot of the money we've collected, which is understandable because we're planning projects and then in construction phase, we spend the most money. As we've collected about half of this, do we put this in some sort of interest-bearing account so that it's sitting there performing and potentially creating revenues that we could use in these projects, or how does that money get allocated financially?
Yeah, I think generally they do go into interest-bearing accounts, but as I recall, and I know the specifics of this particular bond, there are limitations on what you can
Understandable.
invest. You can't just have it sitting there
Sure.
collecting money, right?
All right, thank you.
No arbitrage. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, and thanks for that explanation, Mr. Volbrecht. I think it's very helpful to see where we are financially, to get some answers to Commissioner Schoaf's question, and I look forward to future discussion on the unallocated roadway improvement funding, as well as the funding that was slated for South Dixie improvements. And if possible, I'd like to see some suggestions for those funds to be utilized in that same area, or to help achieve similar results. I realize that it was to be in tandem with the Florida Department of Transportation project, and so maybe our project can't be completed without theirs, but maybe there's something we can do that will still achieve somewhat of the same goals. I understand that funding was a lot for landscaping in that area and things like that. So I look forward to that future workshop, hopefully soon. Thank you.
Any other questions on this matter? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Barber. Appreciate the presentation.